6 people have been killed in a Russian missile strike on the home city of Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy. Dozens more were injured when rockets hit an apartment building and a university in Kryvyi Rih. Moscow says it's stepping up its strikes in response to Ukrainian drone attacks on Russian territory, including in Moscow.
Homes in ruins after a Russian missile struck an apartment complex in central Ukraine. Among the dead, a 10-year-old girl and her mother. Dozens of people were injured. Many residents had a lucky escape.
I woke up 15 minutes before the explosion, went to a different room and heard the first strike. I knew there could be another one, so I went to the corridor. As soon as I did that, there was an explosion. Windows and doors flew out.
We didn't understand what was going on. Then I got a call from my friend, and I couldn't hear what she was saying, so I called her back. And it went back and forth like this. We couldn't hear each other. I could only hear, "Help me." So we jumped in the car and drove here. What we saw was pure horror committed by the Rush. I don't want to say a word more.
This is the city center, where there is no military equipment or facilities that do repairs of such equipment. This is clearly a residential area of the city. Yet again, this is a terrorist act by the Russian Federation against the peaceful population of Ukraine.
Further east, in the Russian-controlled city of Donetsk, several people were killed when shells hit this bus. Moscow says Kyiv is attacking civilian infrastructure to distract from its failing counteroffensive.
The commanders of the Ukrainian armed forces are desperately hurling new forces into battle at our positions. The intensity of strikes on Ukrainian military facilities, including those supporting these terrorist attacks, has been increased massively.
With fighting intensifying and both sides stepping up attacks, it is civilians who continue to be caught up in the crossfire.
Let's go live to Kyiv and speak to DW's correspondent Matthias Billinger for more. Matthias, what do these strikes from both sides tell us about Ukraine's counteroffensive? Is it gaining traction?
I think they don't tell us much about the counteroffensive. The counteroffensive is what happens on the front line, and these attacks that were on a residential building in Kryvyi Rih, that's something that Russia has been doing since the very beginning of the war, hitting residential buildings in several cities in Ukraine. There is nothing new about that, and it does not seem to have any military value, so it has most likely nothing to do with the counteroffensive. The other attack in Donetsk, it's much more difficult to assess what has really been happening there, as the area is not accessible for most international media. But there as well, I think there is no value in terms of a counteroffensive in at least what we have seen from these pictures. So the question, of course, whether the counteroffensive is gaining traction. Claire, you're not asking this for the first time. It's something that we're watching closely. There has been a little bit of progress by the Ukrainians in the past few days. But again, these are incremental progress. These are small steps forward. It's very difficult to say at this stage whether this counteroffensive is yielding any results or not, and it's especially difficult to draw this conclusion from events like these.
Yeah, thank you for keeping us updated on it day in and day out. I do want to come back to those drone strikes on Moscow. Ukraine hasn't claimed them. Do you expect any news to come from Ukrainian officials?
Yeah, there has been a cryptic message by Zelenskyy where he said that basically it's only fair that the war gets back into Russia, into the capital of Russia. But Ukraine has not claimed them, and it's very unlikely that they do. Usually Ukraine does not claim any of the strikes or attacks that have been happening in Russia. That's something that they've been doing from the very beginning. They have been maybe hinting at something, or like officials telling journalists off the record that this and that organization or administration in Ukraine was behind it, but usually they don't, so I don't expect that there will be any official statement on that.
Well, thank you so much, as always, for your reporting. That's DW correspondent Matthias Billinger in Kyiv.
And for more, we can speak to Alexander Müller. He's the defence policy spokesperson for Germany's Free Democrat Party, which is part of the three-party coalition government. Welcome to DW, Mr. Müller. Now, Ukraine hasn't admitted that it carried out the drone attacks on Russia, but President Zelenskyy has clearly said that attacks on Russian territory are an inevitable and fair part of the war. What do you think about that comment?
He is right, because that is what President Putin did from day one. From day one, Putin attacked Ukraine with missiles, and if he says this is an escalation, if you slam somebody in his face and you get a slam back, this is no escalation, this is a reaction, what you provoked. So this is absolutely natural what is happening now.
OK, so that's a very clear answer. Yet we rarely hear any reaction from Western politicians when these kind of strikes happen. So what's Germany's official stance on these attacks?
I think it is a sign from somebody. We don't know who did the attacks with the drones, but there must be some Kremlin enemies. Perhaps it was Ukrainian Secret Service, we don't know, but it's a sign to the Russian people to tell them you are not secure. And this is not a security operation in a far country, but this is a war between our two countries, and you are not safe anymore. This is a sign of these attacks.
OK, so and the German government is supportive of this kind of reaction from Ukraine?
I didn't hear any remarks until now from any government supporter, but we do not call this an escalation or something wrong, because it was to be expected. This is what Putin does since 1.5 years. He attacks Ukrainian infrastructure since 1.5 years, with a lot of strikes, with a lot of civilian losses in Ukraine. So it was to expect that someday Ukrainian technicians find ways, or some other guys who are befriended with Ukraine to do those attacks.
Mm-hmm. And yet German and other Western military aid to Ukraine isn't supposed to be used to attack Russian territory, is it? So if these attacks were Ukrainian, would that be in danger of breaching those restrictions that are linked to Western military aid?
That is right. When Western military aid is delivered to Ukraine, Ukraine always has to make sure that they do not attack Russian territory with these weaponry. So perhaps this could be the reason why Ukraine doesn't admit who has done these attacks. We don't know. But if intelligence finds out that Ukrainians did this with Western weaponry, there will be a problem between the West and Ukraine, of course.
OK. Now, these attacks in recent months haven't caused huge damage in Russia, but they're quite symbolic, aren't they? So how much of a psychological effect would you say that these are having within Russia?
Yes, I think that's the point. Psychological, to tell the Russian people, you are part of this war. This is not a strategic operation, but you are part of this war. And remember how the Soviet Union in those times went out of Afghanistan. It was exhaustion of the Soviet Union, and it was the mothers in the Soviet Union who demonstrated because they lost their sons. And that took Soviet Union out of Afghanistan in those days. Perhaps that is a strategy to make the Russian people aware of the situation.
Thank you so much for your time, Alexander Müller, FDP Defence spokesperson. Thanks for joining us.